Welcome to Dreamers to Leaders, Keeping It Real with Melody podcast. Melody is a classic dreamer who started as a flight attendant and worked her way to now a tech fashion trendsetter, thought leader, and dynamic entrepreneur in various industries. This podcast is for the dreamers and doers. Learn how to think, act, and speak big as business leaders share how they turned from dreamers to leaders.
Hello and welcome to the Dreamers to Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Melody. If you are tired of the boring and conventional coaching programs out there, this episode is for you. Our guest is a speaker, author, coach, podcaster who uses Greek mythology to help business professionals monetize and magnetize professional freedom. He graduated in Columbia Law School and was an attorney for 20 years. Also worked in several senior executive roles for different government agencies and nonprofit organizations before he grew and scaled a manufacturing company. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and let's welcome Scott Mason. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, you, it is so good to be here.
Glad to have you here. All right, so let's dive in. So if you could share with our audience backstory of how you started this new venture.
Well, it's actually my fourth life. I worked as an attorney and an executive for a number of different large organizations, government, nonprofit. And then I went into entrepreneurship with my first company, which was a apparel and accessory printing company, and was able to successfully grow that. After that ended, I initially began a new life as an entrepreneur, providing support and guidance to other small businesses that were looking to grow and scale in the way that that printing company had. But over time, I began to realize that that's not really where my heart was. And it wasn't really where I could see my dreams ultimately being fulfilled. Okay. So I moved into a different direction. And here I am talking to you today.
I love it. So fourth reinvention, right? And maybe another fifth and sixth, who knows, right? It's all about evolution to our higher self, right, Scott?
Exactly. That's what dreams are, ever evolving impetus for us to become something greater and different than before.
I so agree with you. That resonates with me. How many times have I reinvented myself? But with that, I think I do it also simultaneously where, you know, you're kind of dabbling into all these, which I think is also a challenge with me, because instead of being that Nova superstar that one could be, you know, a legend because you're just hyper focused on one. You know, that's where I think my personal challenge is evolving horizontally.
Yeah, but you're very creative. And that is one of the challenges that can come with with creativity, as well as being someone that has a wide range of interests. And there is a richness to life that someone that has had your diversity of experience as well as mine can have, that is its own reward of a different sort.
Wow. So with that journey, Scott, and especially this is, I'm pretty sure you've been asked this a lot, but now it's me asking you because I want to get it straight from you. A lot of people, that's their dream to get to Columbia, get, you know, scholarship, finish and have a law degree, be an attorney. So what was the trigger point for you to say, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm jumping off the board and doing something else? What was that trigger point for you?
There were a couple of things. Mm-hmm. First of all, almost immediately upon entering law school, I realized that there was a little bit of a dissonance, but in actual practice, that dissonance became a little gap that exploded into an uncrossable valley. And that dissonance was between my fundamental nature as someone who likes to build, who likes to create, who likes to be part of making something happen, as opposed to coming in afterwards and cleaning up the mess, which is what litigation was, or else just facilitating other people creating, which is what corporate or transactional work was. So there was, number one, this dissonance that as I got deeper and deeper into that phase of my life became more and more untenable for me. Mm-hmm. But then the other thing goes as to your show's theme of dreams and dreamers. In the large organizations that I worked in, particularly in the first iteration of my life, that was in government entities, dreams were repeatedly crushed. The organizational management that I endured was indescribably abusive at times. And not only did that begin to shatter my own belief that my dreams could ever happen, but after a while, I also just got sick of it. I'll never forget, ever. One day I was standing in front of my boss talking, and this was an agency head, talking about a proposal that she had with a bunch of my colleagues and my staff in the room. Everyone agreed with what I was saying. In fact, I had been appointed the person to say what I was going to say to my boss by the other people at my own level. When I explained to her why we didn't want this particular action to happen, why it was dangerous for her, the constituents that we served, as well as the agency, she said, "Scott, you know, when you open your mouth and talk, you sound so stupid. If I were you, I'd put a gun in my mouth and shoot." Talk about a point where I said, enough is enough. At that point, I realized the minute that I vested in my pension, I was out the door.
That's borderline verbal abuse. I think that's horrible. But you know what? Thanks to her, that maybe was the last straw that broke the camel's back type of thing, right?
Absolutely.
But with a lot of decisions, especially if it is that remarkable with law school and suddenly jumping into something so different, it's usually a series of events, right? It's not just one particular moment. So with those reinventions, Scott, what were the major challenges that you have faced and how did you overcome those?
Beautiful question. You go to a certain level in large organizational life, and due to the environment that you're in, for instance, my final government job, I had a huge office. It was bigger than my apartment. I had my own closet in it, and I overlooked the Hudson River, and you would get to see cruise ships.
Wow.
It was stunning.
You felt like you have arrived, maybe?
Exactly. And people give you a certain level of respect. I mean, if I said I wanted something done, everyone dropped what they were doing and it got done. So you are invested in the status that you are in, but your vision narrows. You believe that everything that you've learned to get where you are, all of those skills, all of that knowledge is all that you need to know. You go particularly into entrepreneurship and you realize how much you don't know. Now, I had another step between entrepreneurship and which I worked in the not-for-profit sector. Even then, my eyes were opened as to the level of my ignorance. But it wasn't until I got into entrepreneurship that I began to envision the knowledge that I had accumulated through my whole life as a plane that was behind me, me standing on a cliff with a vast ocean in front of me. That ocean was of endless depth and of indescribable length. And that was what I didn't know. I hadn't realized that. That lack of awareness of how much I didn't know was the biggest challenge.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's the openness and that humility to know that you don't know enough, or there's so much to know that you just don't know. I feel is also a trait that would help propel one and be not resting on your laurel and always be seeking to improve and to learn more, right, Scott?
So very true. One thing that really helped me though in that regard was I started taking martial arts classes, jujitsu. And I would say that my ego, when I started taking those classes, which was after I'd left these government jobs, but before I went into the next sector, was too big to sort of accept what you're saying. But after a few smackdowns on that martial art, all of which could only be explained by my lack of knowledge and my lack of skill, I had to open up to the fact that I didn't know everything. It's humbling.
So did you say jiu-jitsu?
Yes.
Oh, nice. So you have your black belt, right?
Oh, no. I did it for about 7 years and I got a brown belt. Then my schedule got too busy for me to be able to consistently practice. So it is my eternal shame that I'm stuck as a brown belt.
Brown, but you know what? To get to brown, was it like 20 years? It takes forever to get a stripe with jiu-jitsu.
It sounds like you might have been through some jiu-jitsu or know some people that did. It's hard work.
It's super hard work. My son, actually, he's 8 years old. And that's so funny that you mentioned that, because I told him the other day, can you ask your instructor when you're going to get your next stripe? Because it's been like how many months now from the last stripe, but it does take a while. I did take up Hapkido up to yellow belt. But hey, right? It's still a different color than white.
And that's past the first class, which a lot of people can't ever do.
And it teaches you so much, and it also builds confidence and all that's necessary for life, right? So when you were going through all those changes, Scott, and for our viewers out there who are on the verge of really making that decision, especially with the great resignation that's going on right now with this post-pandemic phase of economy. What would you say to them when, of course, leaving the comfort zone is always uncomfortable? What would you say to them to continue to forge ahead, perhaps, if that's really the calling?
Number one, the risk that is invisible is often the greatest risk of all. The risk of not moving ahead is the invisible risk. Think about it from my own experience, having worked in government. If I had not had my assessment of the risk adjusted, I could have easily been a person not on this podcast, energized and laughing with my new best friend, i.e. you. I would be some bureaucrat wearing a blue suit that was all tired and tattered with a boring red tie every day until I retired, and then the world would forget me. And by the way, Melody, my mentor, who I worked for and inspired me during my entire time in government, who believed in me when no one else did sometimes, he spent his entire life doing that trajectory. I'll never forget when he said, I looked in the window of the subway and saw my reflection, and I was that balding older guy in a boring gray suit. He told me that after he retired, he realized absolutely nothing that he did could not have been done by someone else, and there was no need for him to have been there doing anything that he did for his entire career. What a criminal risk. In fact, I would say that is a risk to our fundamental ethical nature, because we've been given gifts and history and experience to give to this world. And if you have squandered that by just doing something anyone else can, you've committed an ethical crime. That's what I would say.
And you know what? I think it was Mark Twain that said the greatest tragedy is not death, but living a life without purpose. And I know that you have, you still have the podcast today. Today is what? April 15th.
Past day almost.
You talked a lot about, or the theme is about passion, right? Yes. Is there like a formula that you have distilled from,
yes.
For one to maybe even fast forward, finding that elusive, deeper meaning or passion?
Yes. Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that.
Yes. I'm eager to know.
Thank you. And I'm sure you've got a lot to say about it yourself. But Purpose is experience times gifts plus service. That is what I call the purpose formula. However, I want to emphasize, purpose alone does not lead us to where we need to be in life. Purpose has to be combined with a strong sense and connection to our inner truth values. Because you can have a purpose that's malicious. You can have a purpose. Adolf Hitler, not good enough. He was disconnected from any reasonable inner truth values. It can be more mundane. It could be that your purpose, for instance, is to work in museums, but your values are such that you want to be home at 5 every night and with your family.
Right.
And work right causes a disconnect. So I strongly urge, and my journey studying purpose through my podcast has led to a very deep commitment. Purpose is a formula, yes, but has to be tied to values and ethics.
I agree with you. So like the librarian scenario that you mentioned there, my favorite quote on or definition of success is I think Earl Nightingale's definition, where it's the progressive realization of a worthy ideal, right? And that means it's so relative, whatever it is for the librarian or the NASA scientist, right? So it's relative, and success is defined by you, the individual.
Absolutely.
So with your coaching, right? What do you think makes you unique, considering, it is it mushroomed like crazy during the pandemic, all the, coaching, person that would say that they are a coach of X or Y. What makes Scott Mason, remarkable and unique?
Thank you. 2 things. Number 1, I bring to the table and make sure that my clients are served by the full gravitas of my experience. I have, at the risk of sounding arrogant here, a Columbia Law School degree. I have been second in command of a government agency that brought in $100 million worth of revenue, and afterwards sat on the C-suite of the country's largest domestic violence shelter services nonprofit. And I have actual successful entrepreneurial experience. So the package and the gravitas that my clients have told me that I bring to the table, as well as the intellectual force that comes with that sort of experience, I'm thrilled to serve them with, and they've expressed a lot of appreciation for. That's number 1. Number 2, though, the program and the approach that I have is unique. And I challenge people to disagree with me about this. I coach specifically around monetizing and magnetizing professional freedom by dislodging toxic myths and igniting the charisma within. And I bring the full vastness of my professional experience and combine that with a deep interest in, knowledge of, and understanding of the fun, excitement, and deeper meanings of Greek mythology to provide a very one-of-a-kind framework for transformational coaching. And so I think the 2 of those things together really provide a differentiator that I'm excited to be able to offer to those in the world who need the services of people like me.
So listening to you, I totally could see the uniqueness in how different your program is. Number 1 is that broad spectrum of your life experiences, from legal to government, to all the different entrepreneurship ventures that you have actually gone through. So it's real life experience that you bring to the table. So it's that broad spectrum. And this is my favorite. It's you bringing in and tying in the mythological aspect of the Greek gods into this picture. So talk to us about that. Why do you think that that's something that you urge business professionals to look into having an avatar as their hero, perhaps, or to inspire them? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And what a great question. These stories began and were widely told thousands of years ago. They still persist and speak to our culture. And you're nodding because you know it's true. After all these years, why is that? It's because the lessons that they teach, the deeper meanings that are easy for us to gloss over, are real. The gods and goddesses didn't just come into the imagination of the Greeks and continue to burn themselves in our imagination for no reason, but because they speak to things that are inside every last one.
Right.
So if we understand that, we can aspire to be that Olympian. And I do believe if we want to be a successful entrepreneur, we can't just, you always hear, I'm on the hero's journey. Not good enough. You need to become an Olympian.
Awesome. Hey, so what is your avatar?
My avatar is Helios, the unconquerable sun, the guardian of oaths. Helios, by driving the sun chariot up to the top of the sky and then descending every night, is someone that constantly reinvents himself, no matter how dark the sun. Not only that, but think about it. Lies, dishonesty, unethical behavior cannot withstand the sunlight. And that's why people would take oaths under and in the name of Helios. Right. And so it is bringing out and being responsible for ethical guardianship within the community that Helios operates in, and really being committed to that. And finally, Helios was on a mission every day that wasn't about him. Helios, the sun, is about providing light in the world. It's about nurturing plant life. It's about sustaining the very essence of what makes Earth so special. And that speaks to me.
Wow. Who would think that particular character would have so much profound, prolific meaning? But hey, wow. Also, I think how you were able to differentiate yourself using that. And really, if one really steps back, they could then say that with all these mythological creature and all the storytelling, as you've mentioned, that has passed through generation, that until now is still very much true. It is it's one of the most powerful tool to teach, because of the human aspect, the natural phenomenon, characters and traits of deities and titans that one can then emulate, right? And be someone extraordinary.
Yes, which as entrepreneurs, I would argue that we have an obligation to be.
And just to kind of, piggyback a little bit on that, I have this study group and I proposed to name it Athena. So now it's still Athena, wisdom and protectress, and all that good stuff. But before that, in my younger years, and we talked about evolution. And I think as I evolve, I also have evolved my avatars.
I love it.
So Aphrodite was first, love and beauty, and then the Athena, and then, just kind of going through your material, I'm thinking, I think I like Hermes. I'm liking him now, because, with my brand, with One Way, Hermes. So in two aspects, Hermes has actually transcended, time as a brand to still tell the story of what, luxury, footwear, or whatever leather, goods that they have that still resonates, of, quality and luxury and what have you. So I respect that company. And then travel, I think I shared with you, I have a travel blog. I used to be a flight attendant. So that's very much, something that ignites me. So that, and then trade and wealth are kind of what he symbolizes.
Well, and there's a couple of other things that are relevant to this conversation and why I see this as a very strong avatar for you. First of all, he also was the god of communication. He was the messenger of the gods. And so communication was a fundamental part of what he does, just as it is part of what you do as a podcaster. And number two, thinking about the product that you sell. His talisman was a pair of magical shoes that enabled you to fly.
That's right. That's right. Because Mercury was, I think, like the AKA, right?
Yep, they're the same. Exactly.
I love it. Love it. Thank you, Scott. See, that sealed it in.
You know who you are now.
I love it. So you also talked about toxic myths.
Yes.
So can you elaborate on that and how that could be sabotaging a venture?
Absolutely. As mentioned earlier, myths have resonated with us for thousands of years because they are stories that speak to our fundamental experiences as human beings. We can adopt myths, and those ultimately drive our lives. There are 5 general types of myths. Now, actually, stepping back a minute, there's no generally agreed upon taxonomy of myths out there. However, based on my own research and reading of it, there are these 5 types that I see as representing some sort of negative storyline in the historical myths that are directly applicable to the lives that we live today. Number 1, the tragic origin myth, which states that the circumstances of your life are determined by the situation in which you were born in or grew up to. So you can get a lot of victim mentalities coming out of that. Number 2, the ritual myth, which is a myth that the explanation for our behaviors justifies our actions in the future. It's toxic. Why something happened to us does not justify, it may explain, but does not justify behavior. Number 3, the underworld myth. This is the belief that any of us are destined to live in spiritual or emotional darkness. The apocalyptic myth is number 4, which is that we're living in an eternal set of doomsdays, that everything I'm going to touch fails. And then number 5, the social myth, which is that we are destined or that we should live out the social expectations of others. If you're living in any of these toxic myths, you're going to be holding yourself back.
I agree. Yes. So with those myths that you enumerated, what would be good to stop it and replace it with something else?
Yeah. First, understand what's driving those myths. Understand that you have the myths, first of all, if you're living in them, acknowledge it. Then number 2, understand what's driving them. Usually we have some sort of role that we're playing in the myth that is ultimately causing it to be toxic. The common sort of negative roles are villain or monster or victim or bystander or fool. Once you identify your role and begin to shift into a more positive role, and there's 3 specific roles based in myth that people can step into, then it's important to create a new mythological foundation, a new book of myths for yourself. And this ties back into some of the questions that you asked earlier. 1, we want to dig into our past. We want to visit an oracle and figure out who and what our vision for our future might have been before we were clouded by these myths. Number 2, connect to your purpose. Number 3, identify your Herculean strengths. And then number 4, tie it all together and write that new book of myths that is your vision for tomorrow. It's an exciting process.
I know. I could really see the fun, excitement, and deeper meaning, finding deeper meaning in what we do. This part I also like with what you touch on a lot in your social media and in some of your contents, which is the much loaded word charisma. How does that relate to the business environment?
I'm actually going to use you as an example. Part of the reason I was so excited about being on this podcast and why I consider it such a privilege is that I observed you on social media. Why did you get my attention out of everyone else that's out there? Because we all know there's millions of people on every social media channel. Something caused me to focus on you. It's because of the gift that you have.
The Hermes in me.
Exactly. You have, look, part of why we remember the Olympians today is because they have charisma.
Uh-huh.
You have it. If we don't have charisma as entrepreneurs, or I would say as anyone in the world, even if you're working in an organization and you want to get advancement, if you're sitting around like a drone in a corner that no one notices, you ain't going anywhere. Charisma is the tool to be able to magnetize opportunity and ultimately monetize a better future for yourself. It's relevant to everything.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. So, from someone who's an expert in charisma. But you know what? You also touched on the word invisible a while ago. And as they say, charisma is the invisible energy that produces visible result, right? It's the fragrance of the soul. So that's what attracted you.
Exactly.
Digitally, you could smell the fragrance of the soul.
It's amazing what we can do on Zoom these days.
Right. So how does one cultivate that, you think?
4-step process.
Ooh, talk to me. I'm pretty sure our audience out there would want that. Thank you.
I hope they find it useful. Number 1, do a charismatic self-assessment. Now, when we do self-assessments, it can be easy to focus on the negative and the things that we need to improve. I actually think that that's a misbegotten approach. I urge people to focus on the little charismatic gems, the seeds that they have that are kind of interesting and cool. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I saw the facial, right? And then build those out. So that's process solution step number 1. Number 2, understand your message. Understand and be intentional about your message. Focus your brain in every aspect of your communication on what you're trying to communicate, not just on the words or how you express them, but on what you're trying to say underneath it all. Number 3, connect that to your heart. Imagine there being a pipe between your heart and your mind with a little spigot, maybe in your throat, that you unleash, go out. And then number 4, under no circumstances, turn away from that power once it's released. No matter if you're being ridiculed, no matter if you're being laughed at, no matter what people are saying. If you have that self-assurance tied to the connection between the heart and the brain and an understanding of your presentation gifts that are unique to you, you have charisma.
Charisma. So that explains also the definition of charisma, right? It's a compelling charm that inspires devotion. So imagine if you have that power and then, unleashing that power to then have that attracting or inspiring devotion, maybe from your staff, your team,
Exactly.
but I think more importantly to yourself, right?
Exactly. And you raise really embedded in that remark. I love talking to you because there's so much richness in what you say. Embedded in that remark is a refutation of a common understanding of charisma. Charisma is often interpreted as merely being exciting or dramatic or loud. Now, in the Greek myths, the god Zeus had an affair with a mortal woman named Semele. And Zeus's wife was jealous. She pretended to be an old lady and went down to poor Semele and said, well, how do you know that man you had an affair with was really the king of the gods? Anyone can say that they're the king of the gods. And Semele said, oh, that's kind of true. So she went to Zeus and she demanded that he prove that he was the king of the gods. And he at first balked, but she insisted. So he said, okay. And then he revealed himself in all of his Olympian glory. And Semele burnt to a crisp in an instant. There's a powerful message there. The charisma Lightning was literally on Zeus's skin. He was so bright. His eyes were so blinding that her mortal body could not withstand it. Charisma isn't just a big dramatic presence in the room or loudness. It is exactly that substance being tied to it and the ability to attract a positive result. Zeus was big and dramatic in that moment, but the result was the destruction of someone he loved. That's not charisma.
Ooh. Right. Hey, just listening to you, I could see how using mythological characters could be very powerful for teaching because of the storytelling aspect. So it could really totally engage one, right? And to tie it in business, how do you create a powerful brand, right? And it's through that compelling storytelling that resonates and engages people and attracts people to your brand, right? So I see how this could be very, very powerful for especially someone that's in transition in their journey, right? For reinvention. So Scott, for our audience out there who And I told you there's a good chunk of those that are very much on the verge of the crossroads of what they want to do in their life, right? How can they reach you? What is the best way for them to reach you and avail of your workshops and all the good contents that you have, Scott?
Yeah, I appreciate that. First of all, my dominant platforms are Instagram and LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, look me up at s.scottmason, s.scottmason. On Instagram, it's s.scott_mason, s.scott_mason. DM me via either one of those platforms. If you are someone listening to or watching this and you mention that you heard about me through the Dreamers and Leaders podcast, by the way, I will happily schedule a complimentary one-on-one mythological consultation with you, in which we'll talk about no expectations, no obligations, no nothing, just wanting to talk to you because you're smart enough to listen to this podcast. I'm more than happy to set that up and would be excited to do so.
Oh, wow. That would be exciting for our audience out there. So, hey, before we go, you also touched on Oracle.
Yes.
Are you really meaning to say an oracle, or can you expound on that just a little bit before?
Yes, because I want to make it clear. The ancient Greeks' oracles were prophetesses, and their prophecies always came true. Now, I can't do that for you.
I know.
However, I do believe that the oracle, again, the power of the oracle, you should know, interestingly enough, people would travel from all around the ancient world to see the oracle, just to have a few minutes with her. They would ask her these questions. She would give these answers. And like I said a minute ago, and as you know, they always came true. What does this symbolize? As is the case with every character in Greek mythology, it's about something inside of us. We each know our inner truth. We each, somewhere inside, have an idea about the direction that we're in. Now, that truth may have become scrambled. It may have become buried. It may be unintelligible to us in the moment. But if we're willing to go inside, and that's a lot of what I like to do with my clients, be that agent for going inside and bringing out their inner oracle, letting them be an oracle for themselves so they can have that vision for the future. When they have a vision, just like the oracle did, then we can begin to move into action steps to make it happen. But nothing's happening without a vision first.
I love it. Hey, I thought for a minute you were going to allude to Warren Buffett being the Oracle of Omaha.
Oh. Well, that's a different.
But you know what? I like that part where you said, truly, it's not seeking outside.
Yes.
So the minute you do your inner work and you find that gem inside you, and maybe through your help and really a lot of inner reflection is where you find the oracle. So the oracle is not in some Sinai or Mount whatever. it's within, right? So hey, I really had a great time, Scott, in our segment here. Thank you so much for reaching out and being part of the show.
It was my privilege. You have a fantastic show, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Love it. Hey, and for all the dreamers out there, keep believing. You got this. Till next time.